The Galactic Empire's invasion fleet arrived in Earth's orbit like an unholy storm. 30 massive dreadnoughts, each one the size of a city, descended from the heavens, casting shadows that turned day into night. Swarms of smaller ships followed, blotting out the stars as they positioned themselves over the continents below. Humanity had never seen anything like it. The Empire's message was broadcast across every frequency, every screen, and every radio wave. It spoke in perfect English, a calculated gesture of dominance. People of Earth, you have been deemed unworthy of independence. Kneel before the Galactic Empire, or be eradicated. For a moment, the world held its breath. In Europe, leaders scrambled to convene emergency meetings. Prime ministers and presidents issued panic statements, pleading for calm while quietly negotiating surrender terms. Across Asia, governments declared martial law, focusing on evacuation and disaster response. The African Union sent envoys with white flags, and South America braced for the worst. But in the United States, the reaction was different. Inside the Pentagon, General Marcus Reed stood at the center of a war room lit by glowing monitors and holographic displays. The faces of generals, admirals, and intelligence officers filled the space, their expressions ranging from grim determination to outright defiance. The general's voice cut through the chatter. "Well, it finally happened," he said, taking a slow sip from his coffee mug, the one with "Don't Mess with Texas" printed across the front. "Someone thought they could take a swing at us." The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reed continued, "it's go time." The president's call came seconds later. "Marcus," the president said, his voice steady, "do what needs to be done. Consider it done, sir." Within minutes, DEFCON 1 was declared. Nuclear silos were unlocked. Stealth bombers roared down runways. Ballistic missile submarines surfaced from hidden depths, and satellite networks lit up the skies with thousands of surveillance and targeting systems. But it wasn't just the military that mobilized. Across the country, Americans responded in their own way. Small towns fortified schools and churches. City gangs formed militias, stockpiling ammunition and weapons. Farmers welded steel plates onto trucks, turning them into makeshift tanks. And then there were the veterans. From Vietnam-era snipers to Iraq and Afghanistan combat medics, they poured out of retirement, dusting off old uniforms and weaponry. Survivalists in the Appalachian Mountains declared open hunting season on aliens, while ranchers in Texas and Arizona formed cavalry groups armed with rifles, drones, and homemade explosives. The invasion fleet had expected panic. Instead, it met preparation. The Empire lands. The first wave of landers descended in coordinated strikes, targeting major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Houston. Massive troop carriers touched down, and columns of gleaming soldiers marched out. 7-foot-tall humanoids in power armor, wielding plasma rifles and energy shields. Behind them strode towering war mechs, their mechanical limbs shaking the ground. The Empire anticipated swift victories. They expected humanity to cower before superior firepower. They were wrong. In Texas, the first shots came from a rancher with an old .308 hunting rifle. A single well-placed round punched through the faceplate of an alien soldier, dropping it instantly. That was all it took. Within minutes, the hillsides erupted in gunfire. Hunters and farmers flanked the landing zones, using their knowledge of the terrain to turn every ridge and gulch into an ambush point. Homemade explosives buried along dirt roads turned Imperial patrols into smoldering wrecks. In Los Angeles, the gangs took over. Rival groups united, arming themselves with everything from assault rifles to grenade launchers looted from police armories. They turned the city into a war zone, using tunnels, alleyways, and rooftops to stage ambushes. Imperial troops found themselves caught in urban combat they hadn't trained for. Every building was a fortress. Every street corner was a kill zone. Houston was worse. Ex-Marines and veterans set up barricades and sniper nests, funneling the invaders into traps. When the Imperial soldiers tried to adapt, Switching to air support, shoulder-mounted missile launchers and drones filled the skies with explosions. But it was in the Appalachian Mountains where the Empire suffered its first major defeat. An entire battalion of Imperial troops entered the misty forest, searching for resistance cells. They never came out. Booby traps, tripwires, and concealed pits turned the forest into a nightmare. Guerrilla fighters picked off survivors one by one, leaving no trace of their own movements. When the Empire sent reinforcements, they found nothing but empty helmets and scattered limbs. By the end of the first week, the Empire's commanders were in disbelief. No species had ever resisted like this, breaking the chains of fear. The Empire's doctrine relied on psychological dominance. They didn't conquer through brute force alone. They conquered through terror. Yet Earth, specifically America, seemed immune to it. Reports flooded back to High Admiral Zale Theron aboard his flagship, the Devourer of Suns. Each report painted the same picture. Humans didn't just fight. They thrived in war. Zale Theron struggled to comprehend it. They fight without strategy, he growled to his advisors. They use crude weapons and ancient tactics. Yet they bleed us dry. An aide hesitated before replying. Perhaps, Admiral, it is because they are accustomed to war. Their history. Zale Theron's eyes narrowed. What about their history? They have fought more wars among themselves than any species we've encountered. Thousands of years of conflict. Millions dead. Yet, they survived every time. The Admiral's claws tightened against the metal railing. Then we will teach them fear. The bombardment. In a desperate bid to break human resistance, the Empire turned to orbital bombardments. Entire cities were leveled. Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Chicago reduced to smoldering craters. Millions died, but the Americans didn't crumble. Instead, the destruction only hardened their resolve. Images of burning cities flooded global broadcasts, but rather than breaking spirits, they ignited rage. Volunteers poured into recruitment centers. Factories switched to war production overnight. Children were sent underground, while their parents took up rifles and Molotov cocktails. And then the nukes came. When American submarines launched nuclear warheads at the Empire's orbital platforms, the galaxy took notice. The explosions lit up the night sky, leaving radioactive debris where Imperial ships had hovered. The Empire's forces recoiled, stunned by the willingness of humans to use weapons of mass destruction against an enemy far stronger than themselves. They expected surrender. Instead, they faced retaliation. By the end of the first month, the Empire's foothold on Earth had crumbled. Cities burned, but so did Imperial warships. And as the last of their ground forces fled into orbit, Zale Theron realized something chilling. This wasn't over. Humanity wouldn't be content to survive. They were preparing to win. The Empire expected the fires of orbital bombardments to extinguish humanity's will to fight. Instead, they only fueled it. Across the United States, war production surged. Entire industries transformed overnight. Car factories switched to building tanks and drones. Breweries converted to chemical plants, producing fuel and explosives. Civilian engineers developed armor plating for trucks, transforming them into armored personnel carriers. But it wasn't just the military-industrial complex that adapted. America's culture of defiance, rooted in revolution and rebellion, ignited like dry tinder. From ranchers in Texas to fishermen in Alaska, citizens refused to submit. Militias rose, armed to the teeth and driven by vengeance. By the end of the second month, the phrase, "Don't tread on me," became more than a slogan. It was a declaration of war. The Texan Rebellion. Texas had always prided itself on independence, and when the Empire landed in Houston, it got more than it bargained for. The first wave of Imperial troops marched into the city expecting surrender. Instead, they found barricades and ambushes. Hunters perched on rooftops picked off alien infantry with high-caliber rifles. Homemade explosives turned highways into smoldering traps. Outside the city, ranchers formed cavalry units. men and women on horseback wielding rifles and grenade launchers. Their hit-and-run tactics shredded supply lines and harassed patrols. When the Empire deployed towering mechs to crush resistance, Texans responded with ingenuity. Local welders and mechanics turned construction vehicles into makeshift tanks, mounting rocket launchers and high-powered rifles onto bulldozers and tractors. One legendary battle took place at the San Jacinto Monument, where hundreds of armed civilians and veterans held off an Imperial assault for 3 days. They called in airstrikes from F-35s, while artillery rained shells from hidden locations. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Empire had lost thousands of soldiers and dozens of war machines. Houston became known as the Alamo Reborn. Los Angeles, urban hellscape. Los Angeles turned into a nightmare for the Empire's forces. The sprawling city became a labyrinth of fire and death, where gang leaders and military veterans worked together to hold territory street by street. Imperial drones fell victim to homemade EMPs and jury-rigged AA guns. Snipers perched in skyscrapers picked off officers. Roadblocks channeled Imperial troops into tight kill zones where ambushes awaited. Gangs armed with stolen military weapons set traps, collapsing buildings and igniting fuel tankers to create walls of fire. Imperial officers, trained for open-field combat, found themselves outmaneuvered in the concrete jungle. Entire blocks became fortresses defended by civilians armed with scavenged weapons. Imperial commanders ordered carpet bombings, only to face missile attacks from hidden launchers before their bombers could strike. When the Empire deployed shock troops to retake control, they encountered a terrifying new threat: urban guerrilla warfare perfected by veterans of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. By the end of the month, the Empire withdrew from Los Angeles, declaring it unsalvageable. The Appalachian Nightmare. The Appalachian Mountains became a graveyard for Imperial troops. The Empire sent thousands of soldiers into the forests, confident in their superior technology. They had drones, thermal sensors, and advanced armor. What they didn't have was experience fighting guerrillas in the wilderness. The Appalachians were home to survivalists, hunters, and former soldiers who had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. These men and women lived off the land, set traps, and attacked with precision. Tripwires detonated IEDs buried under leaves. Snipers hidden in tree stands picked off officers. Entire squads disappeared into ravines, their bodies found days later strung up as warnings. Veterans used encrypted radios and homemade jammers to disrupt Imperial communications. When reinforcements tried to sweep the area, they walked into ambush after ambush. Imperial commanders began calling the region the Green Hell. Eventually, the Empire gave up trying to hold the mountains, leaving them as a no-go zone. Cyber warfare and shadow tactics. While soldiers and civilians fought on the front lines, hackers and intelligence agencies waged a different kind of war. The NSA, CIA, and private hacker groups launched coordinated cyber attacks against the Empire systems. Using captured technology, they infiltrated Imperial networks, shutting down shields, disabling targeting systems, and feeding false data to command ships. One notorious attack by a hacker known only as Patriot caused an Imperial warship to crash into the Pacific Ocean, killing thousands of enemy troops. Meanwhile, America's Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, and Green Berets operated behind enemy lines. They infiltrated enemy camps, planting bombs and sabotaging equipment. One SEAL team captured an entire Imperial officer corps, leaving the Empire's ground forces leaderless for days. These shadow warriors became legends. The Empire called them Ghosts of Earth, desperation in orbit. The Empire's high command grew increasingly desperate. Reports of mounting casualties and logistical failures poured in. Commanders argued over strategies, unable to adapt to humanity's unpredictability. High Admiral Zale Theron ordered full-scale orbital bombardments, hoping to crush resistance by targeting major cities. Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Chicago were reduced to rubble. Millions died, but the attacks had the opposite effect. Survivors didn't surrender. They vowed revenge. Factories worked around the clock, building missiles and tanks. Civilians donated supplies and volunteered for service. Even children helped manufacture bullets and clean weapons. And then the Americans escalated. Nuclear submarines launched ballistic missiles at the Empire's orbital platforms, shattering them in fiery explosions. Space-based railguns took down command ships, and experimental aircraft launched high-atmosphere strikes. The Empire had never faced this level of resistance. Turning the tide. By the end of the third month, the Empire's forces were in full retreat. Their ships limped out of Earth's orbit, battered and broken. But the Americans weren't done. Using captured technology, U.S. scientists reverse-engineered faster-than-light drives. Within 6 months, Earth launched its first interstellar fleet. And the Americans didn't go to the stars to negotiate. They went to conquer. Conclusion: the Galactic Empire had believed humanity feared war. They assumed Earth would fold under pressure, as so many others had before. But they hadn't accounted for a species forged in conflict. They hadn't expected Americans. And as the first American warships jumped to hyperspace, the galaxy braced for a new kind of terror. One that didn't come from Imperial fleets or alien weapons. It came from humans who loved to fight. The Galactic Empire's fleets fled Earth's orbit, trailing debris and shattered hulls as they retreated into the void. But the Americans weren't satisfied with victory. They wanted vengeance. High Admiral Zale Theron, aboard his battered flagship, the Devourer of Suns, gazed at the holographic displays flickering before him. Red symbols marked lost fleets and destroyed garrisons. Green icons represented what remained of his scattered forces, limping back to Imperial space. He clenched his claws, his voice sharp. They fight without logic, he growled to his advisors. They should fear us. An aide hesitated before replying. Admiral, they don't fight to survive. They fight to win. And they're relentless. Zale Theron's eyes darkened. They will regret this insolence. But the Americans weren't waiting for the Empire to regroup. They were already coming. Reverse-engineering victory. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the United States military worked tirelessly to unlock the secrets of Imperial technology. The captured wreckage of enemy ships became treasure troves of information. Engineers disassembled plasma rifles and energy shields, piecing together their secrets like mechanics rebuilding classic cars. Within weeks, prototypes of human-made energy weapons rolled off production lines. Bulletproof vests were upgraded to resist plasma fire, and drones were outfitted with alien targeting systems. The most significant breakthrough came when scientists reverse-engineered the Empire's faster-than-light drives. Suddenly, humanity wasn't confined to Earth. They could pursue the Empire across the stars. The first American warships, hastily constructed but deadly, were christened in orbit above Earth. The USS Liberty led the fleet, an angular, heavily armed cruiser bristling with missile pods, railguns, and energy cannons. Smaller destroyers and stealth corvettes flanked it, built for hit-and-run attacks. Admiral Marcus Reed stood aboard the bridge of the Liberty, gazing at the stars. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the crew, "let's go introduce freedom to the galaxy." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, striking the Empire's heart. The first target was the Empire's outposts near the Zora system, key shipyard supplying Imperial fleets. American forces emerged from hyperspace with precision, hitting supply lines and refineries. Their tactics mirrored guerrilla warfare, swift strikes followed by sudden retreats. Imperial admirals struggled to counter the unpredictability of human commanders. Stealth bombers slipped past defenses, planting explosives on docking stations and fueling depots. Cyber warfare teams hacked defense systems, turning automated turrets against their own troops. Imperial losses mounted. Entire stations burned as railgun rounds tore through hulls. Ground assaults followed, led by Marines and Special Forces teams who stormed planetary installations. They moved with ruthless efficiency, clearing bunkers and disabling shield generators. Zaeltherin watched in horror as report after report confirmed the devastation. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. An advisor trembled. "They study us, Admiral. They adapt faster than any species we've encountered. And they're not bound by honor or protocol." Zaeltherin snarled. "They're savages." "No," the advisor replied softly. "They're predators. Ghosts of the void." American Special Forces became legends in the Empire. Teams of Navy SEALs and Delta Force operatives infiltrated enemy ships, assassinating commanders and sabotaging engines. They moved like shadows, leaving only destruction in their wake. Imperial soldiers whispered stories of ghosts of the void, humans who killed without mercy and disappeared without a trace. One operation became infamous. A SEAL team infiltrated the Harbinger, an Imperial dreadnought, leading a fleet over the colony world of Dractyl. Within hours, the ship's reactor exploded, taking the entire fleet with it. Survivors swore they saw humans laughing before vanishing into the smoke. Zaeltherin ordered entire fleets to hunt these ghosts, but they always struck first, vanishing into the void before Imperial forces could react. The fear spread. Imperial soldiers stopped sleeping. Commanders grew paranoid. Morale collapsed. Shock and awe. American tactics evolved quickly. Orbital strikes preceded ground invasions, but instead of traditional sieges, the Americans used overwhelming firepower. Drones swarmed enemy positions, firing missiles while artillery rained from space. Once the defenses crumbled, mechanized infantry rolled in. Armored vehicles equipped with railguns and energy shields. Troops moved in coordinated fire teams, utilizing night vision, thermals, and drones to track enemies. But the Americans weren't just soldiers. They were storytellers. Broadcasts of their victories flooded Imperial networks. Videos of Marines raising flags over alien strongholds and pilots executing precision bombing runs spread like wildfire. Even prisoners of war recounted tales of American grit and humor, unnerving Imperial commanders. "They make jokes while killing us," one captured officer stammered during interrogation. "They're insane. Psychological warfare." The Americans weaponized fear. Leaflets dropped from orbit warned Imperial citizens. "Freedom is coming." Hacked broadcasts played country music and rock anthems, while showing footage of American victories. The Empire's propaganda machines couldn't keep up. On occupied worlds, resistance movements erupted, emboldened by news of America's success. Guerrillas painted stars and stripes on ruined buildings, declaring allegiance to their liberators. The Empire's psychological dominance, the foundation of its rule, began to crumble. Zaeltherin's advisors begged him to negotiate, but the admiral refused. "We do not bow," he growled. "We crush." But the Americans weren't interested in treaties. They were coming for the Empire's homeworld. The turning point. The final battle loomed over Velithara Prime, the capital of the Galactic Empire. The American fleet arrived first, emerging from hyperspace like a swarm of hornets. The USS Liberty led the charge, firing railgun salvos that shattered orbital defenses. Velithara's skies burned as American bombers carpeted the surface. Drop pods rained from orbit, unleashing legions of Marines and armored vehicles. The Empire fought desperately, but their soldiers faltered. For the first time in centuries, they faced an enemy that refused to break. Zaeltherin led the defense personally, but his dreadnought was boarded by American Special Forces. As explosions tore through his ship, the admiral made his final transmission. "They are monsters. Victory and consequences." The Galactic Empire fell within days. Its capital lay in ruins, its fleet scattered, and its leaders either dead or captured. But America didn't stop there. They installed a provisional government, enforced democratic reforms, and dismantled the Empire's war machine. Reconstruction followed, funded by Earth's industrial output and driven by American determination. Yet, the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity's rise sent ripples across the stars. Formerly enslaved species flocked to Earth's banner, while imperial loyalists plotted revenge in the shadows. And through it all, the Americans prepared. For them, peace wasn't the absence of war. It was the preparation for it. With the Galactic Empire shattered and its capital in ruins, the universe found itself facing an unprecedented reality, a galaxy without its long-time ruler. Yet, as imperial banners burned and statues toppled, a far more unsettling force began to emerge from the ashes. Humanity, the Americans in particular, had filled the power vacuum with astonishing speed, their fleets spreading like wildfire across former imperial territories. Where once there was order through fear, now there was chaos laced with whispers of something far more dangerous: freedom, occupation, or liberation. In the days following the Empire's collapse, American forces moved quickly to secure critical infrastructure and supply lines. Alien worlds once controlled by the Empire were flooded with Marines, engineers, and diplomats bearing both weapons and promises. At first, many species rejoiced. The Americans spoke of democracy, self-determination, and liberty, concepts alien to most under imperial rule. But freedom came with conditions. Rebel groups on liberated planets were required to disband and disarm, while local leaders faced intense vetting to weed out imperial sympathizers. Entire planetary economies were overhauled to align with Earth's capitalist model. Factories reopened, but now they produce goods for Earth's markets. Resources were harvested to rebuild America's expanding fleet. Trade agreements favored Earth's interests, and tariffs imposed on alien goods ensured human dominance. To many, it was liberation. To others, it felt like occupation. One alien governor dared to voice his concerns during a meeting with Admiral Marcus Reed. "Is this what freedom means?" the governor hissed. "Replacing one empire with another." Reed's gaze hardened. "We're not an empire," he said. "We're protectors. If you can't see the difference, maybe you need to reread the history of your old rulers." And that was the end of the discussion. The resistance and rebellion. Not everyone accepted humanity's rule. Scattered remnants of the imperial military retreated to the outer fringes of the galaxy, rallying under new banners and calling themselves the Iron Sovereignty. Led by a former imperial admiral, Caliph Vroth, the Sovereignty launched surprise raids on supply depots and colonies, targeting American infrastructure. Vroth vowed vengeance for the fall of the Empire, branding humanity as galactic invaders. But it wasn't just former Imperials who resisted. Some liberated species grew disillusioned with America's dominance. Protests erupted, demanding the withdrawal of human forces and the dismantling of Earth's trade monopolies. On the planet Drannith, peaceful demonstrations escalated into violent riots after Marines opened fire on a crowd. The footage went viral, sparking unrest across dozens of systems. The Americans responded swiftly. Martial law was declared. Dissenters were arrested, and orbital strikes silenced rebel strongholds. Special forces hunted resistance leaders with ruthless precision, crushing insurgencies before they could spread. Despite the brutality, America maintained its stance as a force for peace. But the galaxy wasn't convinced. The rise of the Stars and Stripes Coalition. Recognizing the need for allies, the United States formed the Stars and Stripes Coalition, an alliance of species loyal to humanity's cause. Alien worlds that pledged allegiance received military protection, economic aid, and technological advancements. In return, they adopted Earth's democratic systems and swore to fight under the American flag. For many, it was a tempting offer. Former slave species eagerly joined, seeing Earth as their savior. Merchants and industrialists thrived under capitalism, embracing newfound prosperity. But others viewed the coalition as a puppet government, an extension of America's growing empire. Rumors spread that human intelligence agencies orchestrated assassinations and staged rebellions to force compliance. Allegations of resource exploitation and human favoritism fueled dissent. Still, the coalition expanded, and with each new member, America's power grew. Technological supremacy. The rapid advancement of American technology solidified Earth's dominance. Reverse-engineered Imperial weapons led to the creation of devastating new war machines. Hover tanks equipped with plasma turrets, drones controlled by AI swarms, and battleships bristling with railguns capable of shattering moons. The most terrifying development was the Project Revenant program. Cybernetic soldiers enhanced with alien tech, capable of surviving in space and regenerating injuries. To the galaxy, these soldiers were monsters, emotionless, unyielding, and unstoppable. To Americans, they were heroes. But even humanity began to question the cost. Whispers of ethical violations and experiments on prisoners circulated, though the government denied them. Soldiers suffered from PTSD and mental breakdowns as warfare escalated, but the machine of progress pressed on. America had become what it once claimed to fight against, a force willing to do whatever it took to win. Unrest on Earth. As America expanded into the stars, cracks began to form at home. The economic boom fueled by galactic conquest led to wealth inequality. Billionaire corporations profited from alien resources, while working-class Americans struggled to keep up with inflation and job displacement caused by automation. Protests erupted in major cities, demanding reforms and accountability. Some questioned whether humanity had lost its way, abandoning the ideals of freedom and justice in pursuit of power. In response, the government imposed strict regulations on dissent, citing the need for stability during wartime. The Patriot Act was expanded to monitor communications and enforce loyalty tests. Civil liberties eroded as fear of alien insurgents spread, but the people adapted just as they always had. The return of the empire. While humanity celebrated its dominance, the remnants of the empire regrouped. Caliph Rotha's iron sovereignty grew bolder, striking at key installations and disrupting supply lines. New alliances formed among alien species unwilling to accept Earth's rule. Rumors spread of hidden imperial research labs developing superweapons capable of turning the tide. The sovereignty declared humanity an existential threat, vowing to purge the galaxy of Earth's corruption. As tensions mounted, a new conflict loomed. America's forces prepared for war once again, but this time, it wasn't just aliens they had to fight. It was their own doubts, divisions, and the weight of their choices. Conclusion: the price of victory. Earth had transformed from a fragile blue planet to the center of galactic power. But power came with consequences. The Americans had proven they weren't afraid of war. They thrived in it. Yet, for all their victories, they had begun to resemble the very empire they destroyed, dominant, unyielding, and feared. As humanity looked to the stars, it faced a question that would define its future. Would it remain a force for freedom, or would it become the new galactic empire? And perhaps, most terrifying of all, did the Americans even care?